I could be helpful. Ah, screw it. The Maxx. This series was one of the things that completely blew open my mind in terms of what can be done with animation. I saw it around the same time that I saw Ralph Bakshi's Wizards, and the resulting 1-2 punch really cemented that my love of animation was not going to fade as I crossed the threshold of adolescence and entered into adulthood. So how does one describe the Maxx? I'm not asking that rhetorically, I genuinely have no idea. I suppose bizarre would be the word of the day. Everything from the art style to the plot, it's all very experimental. It's borderline stream of consciousness, but it does sort of follow this internal logic. So it's weird as heck, but it's not weird for just the sake of being weird, which keeps it from being as pretentious as it really could have ended up being. Superficially, it's a superhero story, or at least it starts out as one. There's a costumed hero, there's a damsel, there's a villain. In reality, it's about family ties, spirit animals, astral projections, dreams versus reality, and emotional suppression, just to mention a few of the major themes. So given how difficult the story is to describe, I suppose I'll talk about the animation style. And there really is nothing else like this. A lot of the artwork was quite literally scanned from Sam Keith's original comic book pages. But it doesn't mean that it's like those motion comics that kind of get put out every now and then. There's some real dynamic animation going on. Now, whenever you do something in animation, the more details there are in something, the harder it is to make it move and make it look good when it does. So the way the show maintains the integrity of some incredibly highly detailed images is by only animating a few select parts of the image. Now that keeps it from becoming overly static. The most common example would be a character who's speaking and overall they're not moving, but their eyes are squinting and adjusting and their mouth is moving, but the rest of the highly detailed image is left pretty much there. Another fairly prominent example is the female character maybe standing posed, but her hair is waving behind her in the wind. And sort of keeping that steady motion doesn't ever make it feel like you're just looking at a static page or an image that isn't moving. And sort of the way that balance is maintained is because so few elements are actually in motion, it means they were able to put a lot of work and effort into making sure the ones that were moving look amazing and look as good as the stuff that's staying still. If they had tried to animate every single aspect of the character the way they animate these select elements, they never would have had the time or the money to do it. Another way they combat the static frame issue is just by really clever use of the camera, mainly in the form of pans. You'll have the camera slowly move across an image and just revealing more as it goes, as a character is talking, and it keeps it from feeling locked off. But then at the same time doesn't require the extra time, effort, and money required to actually animate the characters moving all that much, because the camera gives that feeling of movement. It's a technique you actually see all the time in anime, but off the top of my head, I can't think of a Western animated film that has borrowed that technique but has zero anime influence in the art style. Now, I'm a fan of the comic book as well, although I saw the animated show first, but I actually think that the animated show works better in some respects than the comic book does, particularly when it comes to flashing back and forth between sort of the real world and the dream world of the Outback. There's one shot which burned so strongly into my memory when I first saw it. It's still amazing. It's this incredibly long, slow pan across the city, and there'll just be flashes of it becoming the Outback. So like, for instance, you'll pan across and you'll see this father heavy guy in a chair with his kids crawling all over him. Suddenly it'll flash to a carcass with scavengers gnawing on it. Then it flashes back to reality again as the camera continues to pan. It's an amazing shot, and it just integrates these two worlds and draws the parallels better than the comic book page did. Then there are the characters who are as unique as the artwork. Maxx himself, he isn't really a hero, he's more just kind of a schlub, and he knows he has to protect Julie Winters, but he doesn't really understand how, and he hasn't even bothered to question why. Julie herself is gorgeously flawed. Ultimately, this really is much more her story than it is Maxx's. And she's a very well-rounded and very complicated character, and it's also quite refreshing that she isn't drawn as the physical ideal. There's a tension brought a number of times to a slight gut that she has that she probably wished wasn't there. But the way the images are drawn, there's still a love of her form, of her more realistically proportioned body, and that's just really nice to see. And then there's Mr. Gone, who is the de facto villain of the piece. And beyond just an amazing design, which is across the board on this thing, but the voice work done by the late Barry Stigler is beyond compare. This is a character who likes to talk, and he does it a lot. And he could have very easily been boring or even grating in the hands of the wrong voice actor. But I never get tired of hearing him talk, which is a good thing because he serves as narrator at various points across the show. Gon is also an interesting villain because he really blurs the lines in terms of how much of a villain he really is. I mean, he's a bad person, there's really no question about that, but at the same time, he is offering more guidance and more insight to Julie and what she's going through than anyone else in the story, and it's a very complicated, very fascinating dynamic. This is the sort of show that I wish I could recommend to everybody, but I'm good conscious I can't because it's just too weird. And some people, they're just going to be turned off by how strange this thing is. However, I'll say this. If you have a love of animation as an art form and you haven't seen this before, watch the first 30 minutes, which is roughly the first 2 episodes. If you feel it's too weird for you, at that point you can walk away and still feel confident that you've experienced the visual uniqueness that is the Maxx. But who knows? Maybe those 30 minutes will hook you the way that they hooked me, and you'll dig this thing from start to finish. So were you around for the days when MTV got into experimental animation, the era that gave us the Maxx? Because it also gave us things like Aeon Flux, The Head, even the first incarnation of Beavis and Butthead. If you were around and saw any of these, what was your favorite of that kind of era and realm of television? Whatever it is, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. As for me, I'll be back as soon as I can get my next fix.